We've all been faced with this before, right? An issue gets reported, and the natural tendency, if it's tied to a system someone is using, is that IT can swoop in and fix the problem. And we can. We're all IT folks. I mean, this is in our DNA. Give me the hammer, I'm going to hit the nail. But then you start to roll up your sleeves and think, maybe there's more to this. Do we have a business process issue at hand here? So there lies the question. Do we have a technology problem or is this a process problem? Stick around to find out. So, Tom, I was thinking about in your past career when you were with Inovia Consulting, a very popular session that you would have on the annual conference. And it was talking about business process. And do you have a business process problem? Or what if your process is broken? And it was a sold out crowd that first year. Then it came back the following year. I was like, okay. But then years 3 and 4, standing room only. So you're on to something there. So maybe give us a little bit of background because it really does bring us to the theme of this episode. Do we have a technology problem or is there something wrong with your process?
Sure. Thanks, Tony. It's interesting. When we first did that, and, we were a technology company. We put in ERP systems, supported ERP systems. But we had been encouraging our customers to get a better handle around what is their process. And we thought, maybe we'll do a session. What if your process is the problem? Just on a flyer. And I'm telling you, full room out the door. And the light went on. Business leaders are frustrated by the disconnect between the investments they're making in their technology and the results they're seeing on the other side. There was a joke when Craig and I first got in this business that said, look, if you don't map your process, odds are we're going to put in technology and just do the wrong thing faster.
And it happened, right, Tom? All the time.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the roof shingle analogy, right? If you keep putting layer after layer on top, at some point, the house is going to implode. Technology does a great job of band-aiding certain things or masking the root cause. But it's when you get under the hood, that's where you bear the most fruit. I mean, think of your ERP upgrades that individuals, the companies go through. The natural tendency is, well, let's just do a newer, shinier version of what we're doing because we have our process down already. The system we're coming from has been tailored to our business, right? Because there's that prima donna view of as a business owner. Well, we're successful because we do things differently. Our process is unique to the solar system, and we need to keep doing what we've been doing. But upgrades, I tend to shy away from that word. I like the ability to re-implement. I won't say start over, maybe that's a strong word, but mapping out their current process, that value stream mapping process, to understand how we could do things better.
When you do the business process mapping, I mean, the engagement of the people are pretty important. What have you noticed when they're not engaged or they're super engaged? I mean, the difference is there.
That's a great question, Craig. So this is an investment. It's an investment in time mostly. These don't tend to be super expensive engagements for a company to get their process mapped, but it does require a multidisciplinary involvement, right? So we need your departmental owner, right? Show me what your sales order process is. Show me what your manufacturing process is. And then we also need IT involved so that they can help better understand how might automation help support that process. But then backing that all the way up, the step we skip is our process really should support our business strategy, right? So number one, let's start with, hey, Tony, what are you trying to do in your business? Where do you see yourself going in the next 3-5 years? What's your mission? What's that audacious, bold statement? We want to be fill in the blank, whatever it is. If you don't have one of those, you got to start there. Why are we in business, and what do we hope to achieve? And with no judgment, what is that answer? Now we start to look at our processes and say, okay, does this process move us toward that goal?
Or at least the foundation so you can start getting towards that goal, right? Because I mean, process map level 1 is okay, operationally, we're in. Now we know we can optimize business process, optimize whatever you want to call it, to get towards that business strategy where there's phase 2, phase 3, but you're not redoing anything, which is the trap a lot of companies fall into, is they have to redo it versus build a new foundation. It's like building a house, build a new foundation, build on that things aren't going to break or have to be redone and with some big expensive upgrades or redo programming.
I was just talking to this owner, and it was his granddad's firm, and this owner's doing a great job. And we were talking about the projects and the things he wants to achieve. And I said, so where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? Where do you aspire to be? And he had a pretty okay answer. And I said, okay, so this will probably be a multi-year project done properly. We talked through planning and design and then implementation. And he's like, well, we got to have it faster. I said, well, were you profitable last year? He said, yeah. I said, so there's no immediate threat to the business? No. Do you plan on being in business in 5 years? Yeah. Well, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. But if we don't take the time to check our map, look at our coordinates, and figure out which direction we're going, and we just start running, you might turn out that you're running the wrong direction. So If you've been in business any period of time, it is better to get it right than it is to get it fast, unless you're bleeding. Right? If there's an imminent threat to your business, customer service or otherwise, then obviously it has to get addressed. But the kinds of things we're talking about in this episode, we should take the time to do it properly.
Yeah, it's the timeline fallacy. We've talked about this many times before. We need this done in 6 months for X amount of dollars. And the right discussion is, or the right answer is starting with the honesty of, we don't know how long this is going to take. You know, we have a day job, there's a business to run, but we want to get it right. Let's focus on getting it right, and then we'll worry about how long it's going to take as we go.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And a lot of times the roles of the people get challenged, right? And I'd like to talk a little bit about the CIO and CFO's relationship on these roles. Sometimes when you're putting in new systems, you're defining processes, accounting may be doing a customer service job, vice versa, just because that's just the way it was done. You know, so the whole IT CFO relationship is taking on a whole new relationship.
Well, and projects used to be siloed, right? I mean, or there was siloed areas to it. Like, Tom, you talk about everybody getting in the room and the key stakeholders in the room. So your head of operations or your CFO, and the CFO knows the financial arm of the business, and the ops lead knows everything under the hood and how products produced and gets out the door. Where there's gaps now are all the interdependencies. You know, I had a CFO that used to say that IT can't lead a project because business will look at it as the tech guy just jamming a solution down the business's throat. Well, I mean, that's old school thinking. You're not going to get very far. I think the best power is making sure that everybody is represented in the room, IT, of course, included, because you think about today's interdependencies of information, AI and where that's going, analytics, reporting, and what do you got to have rock solid underneath it all? Data. And it has to be clean data. So these are the things that we got to be thinking about.
Well, and Craig always talks about the human aspect. We have to consider our people. If you're the kind of owners that we dig the most, hey, you're in business to make some money. That's great. But you're also treating your team like family. You care about their well-being. And you alluded to it, right? These folks all had day jobs before we started doing whatever we're doing. Well, if they're involved in the process mapping, as we're planning out the project, we do a better job of ensuring that they are supported, either with additional time or additional resources to help them complete their portion of this task. I say this to owners frequently. If you've had an employee that's been with you for any period of time, then you're loyal to them and they're loyal to you. And they show up every day trying to do a good job. People who show up for work and stick with you are trying to do a good job. It's a Maslow thing, right? They want to be good at it. Well, I was meeting with somebody a few weeks ago, and one of their peers said, hey, why don't you go in and check in on so-and-so, think they're struggling. So I slide in and I hit the side of a desk, and I think it's going to be a short conversation. And this person is overwhelmed and said the very words, I used to be good at my job. I don't understand this new thing. I'm not good at it. I don't learn this way. I can't get all my work done. And now they've asked me to do even more. Those people need support or we're going to break them. And the kind, that culturally, the fact that when you're doing the business process, which at the end should have some form of a project plan to achieve our desired state, and part of that plan needs to be how are we going to support our team through the process so we don't break them.
And it is a people thing, right? I mean, anymore, if they know what they have, they're engaged in contributing and part of the solution, the success factor just goes up drastically, right? I mean, they know what they're
getting. That's a hockey
into.
stick.
Yeah, it's just they know they're ready, all those good points. And you're caring about what type of person they are. Do they need handheld or do they just want to run? We got to pay attention to the people aspect more than ever, especially with AI, because AI is going to accelerate people either good or bad. Tony, you mentioned information and IT and that being accurate. When I talk about the CIO and the CFO being aligned, we forget about the I in IT. It's all information now, right? They used to look at us as setting up computers, but the I, which is data, which now is AI, which is, hey, we know financials, we know data, we know costing. It's not putting IT in a box anymore.
Being in the room always, I think, is just important. Just an injection molding company that I work with replaces presses, injection molding machines periodically. And something traditionally would just, capital expense, X number of dollars, we're just replacing a machine. Well, until these new machines come in and you sit with the vendor, now it's already ordered and on site being assembled. And okay, now we got to connect this to the network. Oh, okay. And there's one network jack. Okay, so we're going to connect this machine to the outside world because that's how the vendor's going to support it. Well, what's the underlying OS? Turns out it was an old version, customized version of Windows XP.
Cutting edge.
So you want this Windows XP based machine connected to the outside world. These days.
Absolutely not.
That's not happening. Now, can we work around it? Of course we can. We can isolate it, put it on its own VLAN, and if the vendor has to get to it, we can isolate a point in time. But we're wasting a lot of calories, and it's not just one machine. At some point you have dozens, if not hundreds. So that's why, again, back to my point, it's just a new age. You want the business leaders in the room always, because everything at this point forward, we're in it together.
Right. Tony, I just had that same thing happen a month ago. Really nice. CFO wanted to improve the process. They're pulled in a copier company for this MFP. Should have involved IT, right? But they come in, put this thing in. Because his idea is, okay, we could scan it faster, then we can save it to our local drive, then we can upload it. And I'm like, number one, it's going to be attached to the network. We got to check security, and we're not just going to give full access to this machine. That's the tech side of it. But then you talk about the information and the business process optimization. It's like, why don't you just add the scan to SharePoint option on the printer and you save 3 steps? So they don't know those type of things that automatically attach it to the ERP system, right? So it just, that case in point, number one, it's a security, and then number two, it's the process. So getting involvement on any kind of improvement, not that we want to be control freaks, it's just that we have a lot of information that we want to share and help improve everybody.
It's just a different way of thinking, because there'll be times where you're in the room and you have no involvement. I think it's increasingly rare because of how everything is connected now. I mean, this coffee mug is going to have IT in it at some point, right? That we have to consider. But you just need to be in the room. Like, it's kind of weird, right? We're sitting here talking about justifying why we should be in the room. It should be thoughtless. You're part of the executive team. Of course, you're in the room.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, that's the mindset shift that we're going through.
Well, it is. And if you get back to the process for a minute, because there's somebody automating, right? Before we got through asking questions, the 5 whys. If you don't ever take anything away from us from these episodes, if you start asking why 5 times before you start to give an answer, you're going to get much closer to the root cause. And so, Craig said,
punched in the face, either one.
Punch in the face, maybe, but I'd rather get punched in the face and leave than waste time on a project that's going nowhere.
It'll be worth it.
I answered why, God damn it.
Right. But, Craig says information, right? So we're working with Tony. We're trying to help him along. We say, Tony, what are you trying to do? And we're comparing that. So this is the second step of the process phase. First step, we just map the process. No judgment. This is what you're doing. But then I realized that I see Tony with this rubber band around a pack of paper that's about 7 inches thick. And this is one transaction. And Tony's going to reconcile this thing right from the paper. What are you trying to do, Tony? Well, I'm trying to get through these papers. No. Tony, what are you trying? Why is the paper part? Well, I have to make sure the numbers match. So you're trying to reconcile. So now, why does Tony have to go through that pack of paper? Tony doesn't trust that Craig entered the data properly. Craig needs support, right? We have to start making sure that people understand, how do we get that data in properly and efficiently the first time. And so you get
with
that
the trust that the information is correct in there too. Right.
That's right.
Because Craig, you mentioned about the people factor a lot. Like, we're focused on that a lot too. Think of all the dynamics. I mean, there's a traditional tech side to this, but we're marketers. We got to sell this, what we're trying to do. Facilitating collaboration is key. And then change management, relationship building, trust. I mean, there's a lot of hats that go into this. And today's lean mentality with businesses. If you're an employee and you have an hour of downtime, you're an anomaly. Everything is about doing more with less, eking out that every last penny of profit. So many dynamics that go into this.
Fair amount of social psychology, right? But you have to consider all of that as we move through the process, right? So we map the process, then we re-envision the process using that screen that says the customer pays for everything, right? So they knew we were doing this, would they ask us to stop? And then we start to look at tools to improve and cut down the steps to achieve our desired outcome.
The job of just keeping the company secure and then making everybody's jobs easier.
So the question of, is it a technology problem or a business or is it a technology issue or a business process issue? The answer is both. I mean, you'll have examples of one or the other, but I think they're we're saying they're interconnected more times than you think.
And when we're talking with people too, we don't want to, and Tom, we said it in the previous version, it's like, do not make the new system look like the old system. You should be challenging improvement all the time, right? And not over automate. Even when you've got the process mapping done, you got to watch how much change you put in place right away. Now, some of it's good. Some of it needs to be done in increments because of either budgets or just people adoption issues. Because not a dig on accountants, but they usually don't love and crave change, right? But if we can help them get to the next level and show them that their job can be easier, we can automate the reconciliation process. We can throw a Power BI dashboard so we can show them trends over time. IT shouldn't be in a control. It should be in a help the world be better, right? Including our team.
And no owner or shipping manager or customer service person ever got up and came into work and said, okay, how do we make this as complicated and difficult as possible? What happened was, at some point in time, the owner of the company came down and said, Tony, you so-and-so, if we have any more missed shipments this month.
Yeah, and Tom, something you said early on was we have to be involved in the business strategy, right? I mean, because we're going to impact and can impact, maintain, or impact profitability, right? I mean, cost layer, application layer, and security. I mean, a hack will do bad things for us, but automating will increase profitability and control costs, right? I mean, and allow us to scale depending on where we're going. So we always have to have eyes on that business strategy and be aligned with the executive team.
Right. That last part is key. If you've always been in the room and part of the strategy discussion, there's trust in the room. I know you'll have a much better conversation and arrive to a solution that's not going to waste all that time and ensure that the product or your end game is exactly what will best serve the customer and the business.
It usually becomes obvious if everybody's involved.
Yeah, and IT needs to be at the executive level because it will change priorities of that business strategy as well as some direction of the business strategy. I mean, you look at IoT and all that stuff, that's real stuff that could change business strategy direction. I mean, we have some impact now, and it just, if people don't think IT needs to be represented, that's a mistake.
I think there's a level of businesses. Let's call it 5 to maybe 100 million, where they don't have the senior IT. It isn't that they're not invited. They're not present. They don't exist in the organization for whatever reason. They can't afford it, low margin business, too small, but we can't get that level of person. Helping those companies engage with a fractional CIO so that you can at least get some periodic senior level strategic and input on whatever it is you're doing is an option to close the gap.
You create a trigger moment for me, Tom. When you mention these businesses that can't afford it, they're too small. Do the businesses that are too small and can't afford it not have a head of finance? Not have someone tied to operations? You see what I mean? Like, we got to get there. IT is wall to wall. Whether they're on your payroll or they go the fractional space, it's got to be A or B. There is no C. There is no none of the above. If you're serious about getting to that next level and growing the business, there has to be representation no matter what your size is.
Yeah, and we're on a high horse here, but just to drive the point home, finance was never looked at a cost center, but IT was always a cost center, right? I mean, now it's a strategic asset. If it's not represented, it's not there, the business is going to struggle because technology is across everything right now. And it's got to be a mind shift. And that's why we started VCIO too, is every big company needs a CIO or IT leader. Typically they say, I can't afford it. Now they're like, now I know I need it. Now what do I do? Right. I mean, because the danger too is you don't want to have single single point of view, and you got to look for single point of failure in any company. When if there's one person making all the shots, like are we going down the right path or not? And it's just something to consider, having some blind spot coverage, because we all have 30% blind spots, whether you admit it or not. You have it. 30% is pretty much the standard, and you need somebody covering it. That's why we have audits every year, all that stuff. Are we going down the right path? And what's my risk?
When people think about doctors, they say they practice medicine. When you think about lawyers, they practice the law, right? Well, a few years ago, I had prostate cancer and was getting a procedure, and I like my guy. I was local in South Bend. I was getting ready to go, and somebody said, hey, ask him how many procedures he does for this each year. Because they were trying to encourage me to get a second opinion, which I had, so I asked the guy. He does 10, 15 of them a year. The other person does 15 a month. People with more practice tend to perform better. So now you've got your IT person, maybe junior, maybe mid-level, maybe you got a CFO that's done a project or two of the nature you're looking at. Well, if you've got a senior IT person, one of their credentials ought to be deep experience in whatever it is you're having them do. And so if they're not double digits into major system projects, that probably doesn't have to have it. There should be a D in front of their name, not a C in front of their name, right? So, people with more projects. Craig, how many ERP projects have you implemented over your years? Pinnacle and everything.
Couple of hundred for sure.
Right. Me too. So too. And I just ran into that. I didn't even think about that until I was talking with a fellow, and he said, well, what's your experience? I'm like, well, I know I'm north of 200 successful projects. So if the person inside your four walls has done 1, 2, 3, I mean, it's better than 0, but it's not the same level of experience, and you learn stuff. People say to Craig and I all the time, oh, how'd you know that? Like, well, we got our head kicked in on a project 17 years ago, and we said, don't do that again.
Lots of mistakes, right? Along the way.
So it's back to the process, and the process isn't just the mechanics. When I mentioned, social psychologists, I mean, if you haven't gone back and reviewed your Maslow lately, you ought to, because the hierarchy of needs drives everything. And so we need to take the time to understand, first, how do we tick? How does our team tick? Because everybody's got their own sense of what fulfills them. And we need to make sure that we're aligning with their strengths. What's EOS, or I forget, Craig, but, get it, want it, capability to do it, right? And so, we used to tell this joke, oh, they get it, they want it. I'm like, that's great. But if I want to be the wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, I get it. I know the mechanic. I want it. It turns out I can't catch the ball. Right? Yep. And so you got to be able to do it. And once we align that way, and we really play to people's strengths, and we build our teams with that collaborative foundation, our odds go way up, regardless of the project.
You hear 80-20, 80-20. It's a common phrase used to explain a lot of things. I think it fits in here again. When they say, so when you ask the question, do we have a technology problem or a business process problem? I think we got an 80-20 situation here in most cases. It depends on the complexity and the size, because the tech part can be pretty easy now. It's the human side and taking a holistic view of your operation and what this person's doing and what state of mind they're in and what's their resource availability and 15 other things, right? All right, so gentlemen, some closing thoughts on this topic.
Don't over-automate up front. Really get your people buying in on a business process. Help them to be engaged in deciding on direction and solutions. And you'll get way more success if they're engaged, and making sure that we're understanding the business strategy is just some key takeaways from what we talked about today.
And I agree with Craig, Tony. It's the old carpenter, measure twice, cut once. If we get this wrong, we're going to spend a whole bunch of money. We're going to frustrate our people, and then we're going to have to do it again. So take the time, understand your process, reimagine it once you've seen it, and then we can start to talk about what tools will make us more productive.
Well said. And I don't have a lot to add on to that because both of you are spot on. So is it a technology problem or is it a business process problem? Chances are it's both. Take the time to work with the group. Make sure you're collaborating upstream as well. Be in the room. You'll be better off on the back end. Thanks for a great conversation. We'll catch you next time.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice.
Oh,
I normally look at the uploading
how are
thing.
we ever going to redo that?
30 minutes and it wasn't recording. Fucking A.
If you'd have mapped your process, Tony.
Oh my God. Well, I'm sitting there thinking like, oh, this is some good shit. How far are we into it? And I'm staring at a button that says record and not a counter. Oh. All right. We're going to persevere.
Well, that's a load, Tom. Craig, I teed that up just for you because you told me I was a heartless and I needed to care about you.
Hearing about the people just not jamming the process down their throat. Tom, you look beautiful with those sun rays just coming in.
Every now and then the Lord shines upon me, Craig.
It's the light of what you're saying is coming.
I tried to turn it, but there's too much sun. I'm going to have to get a shade. Now he's
back to your picking example, Tom. We had 4 different people, that business you worked with. 4 different people had to touch the order.
You have to scratch that example, Tony, because you weren't recording, and so you missed the best story of ever, guys. But Craig,